Hey everyone, welcome back. In today's sewing tutorial, I'm going to show you how I made this gorgeous DIY tote bag out of this beautiful scarf. So this is definitely sustainable fashion as well as an upcycling sewing project. So let me show you how I did this super quick and easy, and hopefully it inspires you to make your own. So I'll be ironing on this interfacing, and I've linked it below in case you want to buy the same exact one. It will give my fabric some structure because the scarf is thin. So what I'm doing is I'm literally just using, really no measuring, I'm just using the width of the scarf, and I'm going to cut my interfacing the same size. Have two Pellon pieces cut out for front and back, and the scarf isn't exactly perfectly lined up here. As you can see, it is a scarf. It's not perfect sewing. So what I'm going to do is not mind that, and you'll see that my sewing will not be exact, but I gotta say the tote came out perfect. So I am not following the directions for the Pellon, but if this is your first time working with Pellon, definitely lay a damp towel in between, a slightly damp towel, or even another cloth of fabric. I don't always follow the rules, and I do this with my interfacing. So now what I'm going to do next is just cut off against the Pellon here, just using the Pellon as my guide. And this will either be the front of my tote bag or the back. So as I sew free projects like this, different ideas come to me. So right now this idea came to me, and what I'm going to do is peel off some of the scarf that is ironed onto the Pellon, and I'm going to cut this off because I want this detail of the scarf on the front of the tote. I'm measuring about 3-inch seam here, so I'm just going to bring it along to try to keep it as even as possible. But like I said, the scarf is not perfectly sewn. As you can see, cutting on an ironing mat never works well for me. So I have the front and back of the tote, or the two panels, ready to go. So what I'm going to do next before I do any sewing is to cut out two of the same size fabric panels of the interior of my tote. So I'm just going to use this sort of as my template and cut out two of these. And what I'm using is plain cotton, and I didn't do that on video, and I have it just lined up or laid up against here. As you can see there, again, plain cotton I'm using. I've placed the two sides, wrong sides together, so the interiors are touching each other, and I'm going to clip together all sides, trying to match them up as best as possible. I'm going to cut off this extra edge because remember I said my scarf wasn't perfect, and this isn't perfect sewing with measuring. So now the edge is perfect. So what I'm going to do now is sew all the way down and up, back stitching on the ends, and I'm deciding to actually leave the flap down. I am going to use a seam guide so that I give myself a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I am doing 1/2 inch because my edges are not exactly lined up. And what I am doing here is creating a French seam. So to continue the French seam, what I'm gonna do is trim as close as I can to my seam line or my sewing without actually cutting the sewing. So get super close. And yes, this is all on the correct side of the tote bag. After I trimmed, I turned it wrong sides out and I'm pressing out the seam so it's at the very edge and I'm giving it a press on all 3 sides that I ironed. Okay, I'm gonna hide this fringe all inside and I don't want to catch it on the sides as I sew along, again, the same 3 edges, keeping that fringe away. What I'm gonna do is sew about under a 1/2 inch, but more than a 1/4 inch. So I say about 3/8 of an inch. So what I'm gonna do here is put these pins, hoping that it helps keep the fringe away because I just can't have it get caught in the seam. It would just create a mess. So as I'm pressing this, I decided that I want to give it box edges. So here we go. I should have left it wrong sides out. Let me flip it around again and show you how to create these. I did give it a second sewing line here off video because one of my edges didn't catch. So that's just a little thing I fixed. So anyway, how to create boxed edges. I am putting a pin through, making sure both seam lines, both the side and the bottom seam match. So by putting a pin in, shows me we're at the same point. So I'm going to mark it with chalk here. I'm going to do 3 inches from the tip or the point all the way down. So it'll be a nice boxed corner, giving me a nice flat bottom of the tote. I'll explain this side again. So again, I folded it together and I'm making sure the seams are right on top of each other. So I like to use a straight pin and I push it through to make sure it comes right out to the other seam. When it does, you have your seams lined up. So I'm just going to pin it down on both sides. And then again with my seam gauge, I'm going to measure 3 inches from the tip all the way down. So that's 3 inches right there. You could do a larger box corner or even a smaller one. When sewing this box corner, I'm going to double sew it to give it just reinforcement. All that means is I'm going to leave my needle in at the very end, lift my presser foot, spin the bag around, and sew right over that line and backstitch on the end. And that's it. This reinforces it, so if I put something super heavy in the tote, I don't have to worry about it coming apart. Next, with my seam gauge, I'm going to measure a 1 inch hem and I'm going to work my way around the entire top of the tote, measuring and pressing 1 inch. Once I have that first hem pressed, I'm going to double it. So all I'm going to do is flip it over and press it down. Super easy. Looking gorgeous so far. I've put the tote bag aside because now I have to create the two handles. So what I'm going to do is, using the interfacing, I'm going to cut 3-inch width handles. You could do any size you want, thinner, wider, totally up to you. And I'm making the length of the actual interfacing. Makes it easy. But again, if you're doing this and sewing along with me, go ahead and create the shorter or longer tote handles, whatever you like. And just like before, I'm going to press these down with the shiny side onto the wrong side of the fabric. Next, I'm going to press 1/4 of an inch hems on both the top and the bottom. Once both of the hems are pressed, I'm going to fold the entire strap in half and press again. I'm going to sew a top stitch very close to both edges of the handle. This way it stays nice and flat when you're wearing the tote. There is no seam allowance here, just close to the edge. Now that I have my handles complete, I'm going to put them on one side of the tote. So first you're going to fold your handle without any twists in it, like this. Just make sure it's nice and straight. You're going to hold it upside down just like I am, and place it wherever you want here. You can measure from the side seam all the way up to your handle, just so that you know exactly where to place the other one. Or you can eye it, it's totally up to you. Then you're going to fold up that handle just like this and hold it in place. I decided to use clips because there's a few layers of interfacing there and my pins are giving me a hard time. As long as they don't slip out. Now for this one, I'm not going to really measure as much because I'm going to use the first handles as my guide as to where to place them. My next step is to give it a top stitch all the way around, and a second top stitch right below it. So I'm going to use the natural design of the scarf to follow for my second top stitch. As you can see, I'm always making sure that none of these tassels are getting caught anywhere in the sewing, because it would just make things a little more challenging. Because of the design of this scarf, I'm not going to use my typical way of sewing a tote. I'm going to use or follow the natural design of this scarf. So this bottom edge here, I'm going to use that as my second top stitch all the way around. And I don't know if you can see it on video, but it's not perfectly the same size. So I just figure, hey, this is a tote that came out the way it came out, and it's still gorgeous. And the fabric wasn't cut perfectly or created perfectly, and I'm just fine with that. Because remember, it's handmade. And there you have it. This DIY sustainable fashion easy tote was so easy to create out of a scarf. So if you really love sewing totes and other fashion accessories, go ahead and check out my other videos right up here on the screen. Thanks again for watching, and don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to my channel.